Hey, what's up guys, Pattycakes here. So with the new changes implemented in Armor 2.0, along with the new changes where class ability cooldowns are determined by your mobility, resilience, and recovery stat, I wanted to figure out how do you actually get the fastest dodge cooldown possible on a hunter. So in this video, I wanted to break down anything I could imagine that would impact hunter dodge cooldown timings, in order to get the absolute fastest cooldown that I possibly could. So let's dig in. In case you hadn't heard yet, Paragon mods are no longer in the game for Armor 2.0, and instead if you want faster cooldown for your class ability, you need to either use mobility for Hunter, recovery for a Warlock, or resilience for a Titan. So the goal here is to figure out which items actually give us more mobility, and which ones otherwise decrease the cooldown time. The first thing I wanted to test was just a baseline with 100 mobility, no exotic armor, and just a regular weapon. This way we can get an idea of what our cooldown is like when we don't add any special armor, weapons, or abilities. You can see here the base cooldown with 100 mobility is about 10.5 seconds. So the next thing I wanted to look at was lightweight weapons. These give you basically a hidden mobility stat, and I was curious to see if they would stack on top of 100 mobility. You can see here in the test that it actually doesn't seem to stack on top of 100 mobility, it still is about 10.5 seconds. In the next test here, I dropped my mobility down to 80, still without using any exotic armor or any special abilities, and just using a lightweight weapon to see what the difference would be. With this setup, I still had a cooldown of about 10.5 seconds. Next, I dropped down my mobility just 10 points further to 70 and repeated the exact same test. This time I had a cooldown of about 12.5 seconds, so just a little bit longer than our base cooldown with 100 mobility. I wanted to repeat the same test here with the MIDA multi-tool because I was curious to see if that would actually give us more of a benefit than just a normal lightweight weapon. At 80 mobility with the MIDA multi-tool, we still had about a 10.5 second cooldown. While dropping that down to 70 mobility, it was about 12.5 seconds, just like it was with the lightweight weapon. So as far as I can tell, the MIDA multi-tool works just like a lightweight weapon in terms of adding mobility for dodge cooldown reduction. I also wanted to test the MIDA multi-tool and mini-tool together just to see if that would have any impact. But testing at 70 mobility, it turned out to be exactly the same as just using the normal multi-tool or a lightweight weapon. The next weapon I thought would be interesting to test was the tractor cannon. There's a special ability called the scientific method after you get it killed that gives you extra running speed. And I was curious to see if this would give us extra mobility and give us extra dodge cooldown reduction. It turned out while running at 100 mobility, it didn't seem to give us any extra cooldown at all, it's still 10.5 seconds. Now I was curious to see if this was just because it wouldn't stack higher over 100 or if the perk didn't seem to do anything at all. So here I am with 70 mobility, dropped down a little bit, and getting the scientific method perk activated during the entire dodge cooldown. You can see that it ended up with almost a 17-second cooldown, so I believe this isn't really doing anything to reduce our dodge cooldown. And I figured someone would be interested too to see if I actually had to be running while I did this test. So here I am keeping the buff active while running, and it seems to be the exact same result, just under 17 seconds for the full dodge cooldown. So after testing the weapons I thought would have an impact, I wanted to dig into the armor. Here I am testing Stompees at a 100 mobility. It doesn't seem to give us any extra cooldown, it's still 10.5 seconds. So again, I was curious if it just wasn't stacking above 100 mobility or if the Stompees actually didn't do anything. So I first wanted to get a baseline with 80 mobility with no extra exotic armor equipped. You can see here that was about 14 seconds. So now I put on Stompees and reran the exact same test, just to see if Stompees had any impact at all on our cooldown. And turns out, as far as I can tell, it does not. It's still just about 14 seconds before you can dodge again. So I guess the takeaway here is that although Stompees do increase your movement speed, they don't actually seem to count for any of the mobility stat, and therefore they don't actually reduce your dodge cooldown. The next armor piece I thought would be interesting was the Dragon Shadow. In case you're not familiar with this, Dragon Shadow gives you a buff called Wraith Metal Mail after you're dodging, which gives you some extra movement speed and mobility. So the first thing I wanted to test was to see if it would stack over 100 mobility total. So here I am running with 100 mobility, and you can see the result here is still our 10.5 second cooldown, so it doesn't seem to stack at least over 100 mobility. So the next thing I wanted to test was dropping our mobility down to 50 with just a regular weapon and seeing if it had any impact at all. You can see that the dodge cooldown is about 11 seconds total, which is actually really close to what we get normally with 100 mobility, so I was really impressed with this. It seems to give something around the same number as a 50 mobility benefit. I repeated the exact same test now, but with 40 mobility just to see if the trend would stay true. And you can see that the dodge cooldown was extended just a bit to about 14.5 seconds, so still really good. It's amazing to me with this exotic, you can actually run a very low amount of mobility and still have a very fast cooldown on your dodge. The final armor piece I was really interested to test was Frosties. Frosties have a perk called Rapid Cooldown that procs while you're running. This greatly reduces your cooldowns, including your dodge. What I thought was really neat here too was that Frosties stack above 100 mobility, so it seems to be a completely different effect. With 100 mobility, you get your dodge back in just under 6 seconds. I also wanted to test the mod Traction on armor because supposedly this gives you 5 mobility that's visible on the armor and another 10 that's invisible. I ran a test where I put my mobility all the way up to 100 and then also equipped Traction on top of that, and it seems that it only gave the normal 10.5 second cooldown, so it didn't stack above 100 mobility. However, I also was able to get my armor to the point where I thought I was getting full benefit from Traction. I had 89 mobility, so I got the +5 that's visible on the sheet, and then the supposed extra 10 invisible mobility points to equal over 100. Running this checked out, and I did get the full 10.5 second cooldown just like you'd expect with normal 100 mobility. So Traction does seem like a pretty good option if you can fit it into your build. The next area I wanted to focus on was subclass abilities. The most interesting one here to me was Bottom Tree Arcstrider. While you're running, you get a perk called Focus Breathing, which reduces your dodge cooldown. It basically works just like Frosties. So here I am running with 100 mobility, no exotic armor, and just the regular weapon. You can see I get a dodge cooldown of just under 8 seconds. I repeated the exact same test with Top Tree Nightstalker. This one gives you some extra movement speed just inherently, so I was curious to see if it would decrease the dodge cooldown. But as you can see, we're back to our normal 10.5 second cooldown, so I don't think it really does anything here. And finally here, just to confirm, I wanted to test this by dropping our mobility down to 80 to see if it had any effect at all. And as you can see, it doesn't seem to give us any extra dodge cooldown. We're just over 14 seconds for our dodge. So now that we've tested most of our basic abilities, I wanted to see which ones start to pair together. So here I am with 100 mobility and Bottom Tree Arcstrider, also running Frosties. This is where our dodge times start to get ridiculously fast. This pairing gives you a blazing fast 4.5 second dodge time, which is absolutely ridiculous. I also still luckily have a few pieces of armor 1.0 in my vault, and I wanted to try out some Paragon mods just to see how they would stack together. So here's a test with 60 mobility, the Dragon Shadow, and 4 Paragon mods. Unfortunately, I don't have a pair of Dragon Shadow from armor 1.0, otherwise I would run an extra Paragon mod to make it 5, and I think that would still reduce the cooldown just a little bit further. The result here is about 7.5 seconds, which is really good. Next, I wanted to run the exact same test, but this time on Bottom Tree Arcstrider to see how that would stack together. The results are a little bit of a diminishing returns type of thing, but it still did give a 6 second dodge cooldown, which is amazing. Since I had my Paragon mods out now, I wanted to see what it would be like to run Frosties with the 5x Paragon mods. This is where things start to get actually ridiculous. So with 80 mobility, Frosties, and 5 Paragon mods, you're just under a 4 second dodge cooldown. And finally, to top it all off, I added Bottom Tree Arcstrider to the mix, which dropped another half of a second off for about a 3.5 second dodge. This is absolutely nuts. But the thing is, I don't think you'll see many hunters running this in PvP anymore, because you're sacrificing an awful lot to get those Paragon mods, since you can't run Armor 2.0, and there's a lot of great mods that you're giving up to run those. I also have a little bonus segment for you here. I wanted to test the impact of running Void Battery. So here's 100 mobility, no exotic armor, Void Battery on my cloak, and just a regular weapon. You can see that it basically doubles the dodge time up to about 20 seconds from our normal 10.5. And since we're testing Void Battery, I wanted to see what I could do to absolutely maximize cooldown rate so you could dodge as fast as possible while still using Void Battery. The build I was able to come up with here was 90 mobility, 4 Paragon mods, Frosties, Void Battery on my cloak, and a lightweight weapon. This resulted in a 7.5 second cooldown, which is ridiculously fast considering you get an overshield every time you're dodging with Void Battery. However, like I mentioned earlier, you are giving up an awful lot to run this build, so I don't really think it's worth it. I hope you learned something cool from this video. Let me know in the comments below what you thought was the most interesting. Also, if you have any ideas for things you'd like me to test in a similar format, these videos are pretty fun to put together, so just let me know. I'm open to testing just about anything that you can imagine. This type of video does take me a lot of time though, so I'd really appreciate it if you give me a thumbs up rating if you thought it was cool. That's all for now. Catch you guys next time.
Hunters like you blaze a path for the rest of us. Enemy team